nurtured in lush conditions. Visionary education too springs from seeds of innovation. The Open University of Sri Lanka has been the site of fecund growth for many a Sri Lankan who seeks a second chance in lifelong learning. Through our revolutionary mode of teaching, the open and distance learning mode, we have nurtured the lives of students who seek academic engagements in the humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, engineering technology, management, health sciences, and education. Fertile soil and nutrients create the conditions which allow a seed to face the world. We offer extraordinary facilities for the ODL learner. Library, labs, day school space, study space, recreation, IT labs, and field trips. As the plant grows, it must face fresh challenges. It must expand, branch out to expand its reach, its sphere of influence. Our reach is the widest any state university could offer. With 9 regional centers and 19 study centers planted all over Sri Lanka, OUSL brings a world of learning to your doorstep. Obstacles are common challenges for a growing plant. Timely forums allow our students to be in touch with realities of the outside world. As the new leaves spread, occupy the skies, and bear fruit, symbolic celebrations are
the Open University of Sri Lanka, the legal department was where I obtained my first degree, and that was a time when Professor Savithri Gunasekara was the head of the Department of Law, and I must say that we gained much from her experience. And I very well recall a particular viva in which I participated on the law of property, and the questioning, the manner in which she questioned us was a way forward for us to understand
Good morning,
how the
my
law
dear esteemed
has to
guests.
operate, how the law has to function.
I would like to say
In
that
order
I'm
to
deeply
officially
and sincerely
start
grateful
the
for
inauguration
university
session
for imparting
of
me
today's
with
event,
rich wealth of knowledge, for I would not be what I am today if not for the education imparted by the university to me. I have started my career as
I humbly request from all of you to go outside the auditorium because there is a cultural event is ready for you to escort to the auditorium once again. Thank you.
University has been beneficial for me to enhance my knowledge and making public statements all the time.
The degree offered by the Department of Language Studies using the ODL philosophy. As a result, I gained my degree while working, offered me the flexibility to be a wealth creator outside the university and also combine and create knowledge within the university.
I have been in the teaching profession for the past 12 years. After the completion of the first year of this career, I thought of gaining a professional qualification which goes hand in hand with what I teach here in the school.
I decided to join OUSL in response to my passion to update myself as I crave to acquire new skills and discover new teaching methodologies.
Good morning.
In both language and literature teaching.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
I am now a senior program officer.
Ayubowan. Good morning, ladies and
gentlemen. Action Forum. I graduated in 2008 at the Open University's BA program in Social Studies. This helped me to further my education, and I have also done my Masters in Development Studies and Public Policy.
You get to learn at your own pace. That is the best thing. Further, there are multiple entry and exit points with certificate level programs to graduate level programs up to postgraduate level programs.
Good morning. ආයුබෝවන් මේ වොලියම් එක ඇහෙනව නේද? කමන්න අතන එක්කෙනෙක් පාඩි කරවන්න. ඒක ප්‍රශ්න නෑ. අර ගෙස්ට් එක මෙහා පැත්තේ කොටුව. ගෙස්ට් එක මෙහා පැත්තේ කොටුව. Hello, testing 1. Ayubowan. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pleasure and pride that I welcome you all to the South Asian International Economic Law Network 4th Biannual Conference 2024, organized by the Open University of Sri Lanka and South Asia International Economic Law Network. Today marks a significant milestone in our shared journey of advancing knowledge and fostering global collaboration. Therefore, we are honored to host this prestigious gathering of distinguished academics, researchers, professionals, and students from all around the world. As we begin this conference, we embark on a journey of knowledge sharing, intellectual exchange, and innovation. This event brings together brilliant minds to discuss and address local approach to the international economic law, which is of critical importance in today's global context. So, to formally commence our proceedings, it is a tradition in Sri Lanka to light the oil lamp at the beginning of an auspicious occasion, symbolizing the illumination of wisdom and the dispelling of darkness.
In that spirit, it is my great honor to invite Senior Professor P.M.C. Tilakaratne, the Vice Chancellor of the Open University of Sri Lanka, Professor Anton Piyaratne, Dean, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, the Open University of Sri Lanka, Professor Sanat Vijayasinghe, Head, Department of Legal Studies, Professor Leila Shokroon, Co-Chair, SAIELN 2024, Professor M. Sonaraja, Emeritus Professor of Law, National University of Singapore, Professor Marcus Wagner, Professor of Law, University of Wollongong, Professor Gregory Schaffer, Professor of International Law, Georgetown University Law Center, Dr. W.A. Vijayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Anura Wickramasinghe, Bursa, the Open University of Sri Lanka, Ms. Vindhya Jayasena, Registrar of the Open University of Sri Lanka, one presenter of the SAIELN 2024, Mr. Pushkar Reddy, representing the Indian organizing team, Ms. Niluka Damayanti and Ms. Niroshika Liana Mohandiram on behalf of the Sri Lankan organizing team of SAIELN 2024, Dr. Raja Gunaratne, representing the Department of Legal Studies, Dr. Kalana Senaratne, Head, Department of Law, University of Peradeniya, Mr. Prashantalal Dialvis, President's Council, Principal, Sri Lanka Law College, Mr. Ajanta Vaduge, representing the student volunteers, Professor Sanjay Notani, Professor in Practice, Professor Murali Kaluma, Professor WTO Studies, Mr. Vijita Manamperi, Senior Attorney at Law, to light the traditional oil lamp.
Dean of the Health Science Faculty, Dr. Sunil.
Also, I would like to invite Dr. Sunil, Dean, Faculty of Health Sciences also. May the light of the lamp guide us all towards wisdom and understanding. Thank you, everyone. Paying our deepest gratitude to Mother Sri Lanka, let us all stand for the national anthem.
Namo
Thank you everyone. We are now moving to the opening session of the conference. First, to set the tone for today's proceedings, we will watch a short promotional video about the conference.
Welcome to the South Asian International Economic Law Network 4th Biannual Conference 2024. The theme of this conference is Local Approaches to International Economic Law. This will provide a platform for experts, policymakers, lawyers, academics to share their voices across the globe. Sri Lanka, known as the Pearl of the Indian Ocean, is a nation steeped in culture, rich in history and vibrant in its economy. This conference explores how local contexts like ours shape approaches to international economic law, fostering innovation and collaboration. The Open University of Sri Lanka, with a legacy of excellence in higher education, is honored to host this global event. A key part of this tradition is the Department of Legal Studies, which is committed to shaping future legal professionals in Sri Lanka. As you step into our department, you enter a space where academic rigor meets innovations, fostering a dynamic environment for teaching, research, and discourse in law.
Welcome to the Open University of Sri Lanka. Open University of Sri Lanka is delighted to host the 4th Biennial Conference of the South Asia International Economics Law Network. This time, the theme of the conference is Local Approaches to International Economics Law. Esteemed panel members, academics and professionals all around the world will be talking about the recent trends as well as cutting-edge research findings relating to international economics law. We cordially invite you all to attend the event and also engage in these thought-provoking discussions.
This event is a testament to collaborative effort, showcasing our commitment to meaningful academic and economic discourse. By hosting this conference, Sri Lanka emphasizes its vital role in fostering international dialogue and contributing to global economic governance. Together, we shape a future where local insights enrich global understanding. Welcome to the conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, this conference would not have been possible without the visionary leadership and dedication of our organizers. To extend a warm welcome and share the vision behind this event, it is my pleasure to invite Professor Sanath Vijayasinghe, Head of the Legal Studies Department at Open University of Sri Lanka, to deliver the welcome address. Professor Vijayasinghe, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, respected colleagues, and dear participants. This is a moment filled with happiness and many more other feelings because the Department of Legal Studies of the Open University of Sri Lanka is hosting this much of an interesting and important international conference. Okay, thank you for joining with us today. On behalf of the Department of Legal Studies at the Open University of Sri Lanka, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this important event. To the South Asia International Economics Law Network 4th Biannual Conference. Today makes the beginning of a vibrant 3-day exchange of ideas, experiences, and innovations in the field of international economics law. The Open University of Sri Lanka is privileged to host this event, which brings together distinguished assembly of esteemed scholars, legal practitioners, and policymakers from across the globe. This is truly a remarkable occasion to the Open University and to the department and to my team. As we commence, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the esteemed individuals gracing this opening occasion. We are deeply honored to have Senior Professor PMC Tilakaratne, the Vice Chancellor of the Open University of Sri Lanka, whose immense support led us to this momentous occasion. A special welcome to Professor Anton Pieratne, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, whose support is deeply appreciated. Let us extend a heartfelt welcome to the co-chair of the South Asia International Economics Law Network, Professor Laila Chakroon, Professor of International Economics Law, University of Portsmouth, and the co-chair of the South Asia International Economics Law Network, and also Professor James N. Nadempara, co-chair, professor and head of the Center for Trade and Investment Law, and also co-chair of the South Asia International Economics Law Network. Professor Marx Wagner, University of Wollongong, the Executive Vice President of the Society of International Economics Law. We are honored to have you here today. And we're delighted to welcome our distinguished keynote speakers, Professor Gregory Schaffer, Ginsberg Professor in Economics Law, International Law, Georgetown University Law Center, USA, and Professor Suresh Nanwani, Professor in Practice, Durham University, UK, Professor Catherine Coleman, Professor, Georgetown University, United States of America, who will share their expertise on international economics law. A warm welcome also goes to Dr. W.A. Vijaywardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Tusit Tabesekara, Head Legal Studies of the University of Sri Jayawardenepura, and Professor M. Swarnaraja, Emeritus Professor of Law, National University of Singapore, who joins us as guest of honors, bringing their invaluable perspectives to this event. Let us warmly welcome our esteemed international and local panel members for the sessions, whose expertise will undoubtedly enrich our understanding on international economics law. We are delighted to host such a diverse and distinguished group of international and local participants, speakers, and presenters who bring global and local perspectives to the platform. A heartfelt welcome to our colleagues and friends from the South Asia International Economics Law Network and Center for Trade and Investment Law. A very special thanks and a welcome to our sponsors whose collaboration has been instrumental in making this event possible. Thank you for trusting us and being with us today. We are grateful for the presence of local stakeholders who provide crucial connection between research and practice. We are also honored to have heads of department and also the heads of other law teaching institutions in Sri Lanka, principal of the Sri Lanka Law College, and researchers and also practitioners. We cordially welcome deans of other faculties, Dean Health Sciences, Dean Management Studies, Dean Education, Dean Natural Sciences, Dean Engineering, and Registrar, Bursa of the Open University of Sri Lanka, heads of other departments, academic staff members of the other departments, and academic staff members of the Department of Legal Studies. With much appreciation, I welcome administrative and academic support staff members, and especially non-academic staff members of other divisions whose engagement is vital to success this event. A special welcome also goes to the students and early career researchers who are here to learn, share, and grow in the field of regarding the knowledge in the field of international economics law. We are privileged to have each and every one of you present here today. Once again, I welcome you all to this forum of knowledge and collaboration. Let us make these 3 days not only productive but also inspiring as we chart new paths in the field of international economics law. Thank you, and I wish you all a successful and fulfilling conference.
Thank you, Professor Sanat, for your warm welcome that pleases everyone. Through commitment to both academic excellence and societal relevance, you led the faculty with the purpose and direction. Your steadfast guidance and dedication brought us here today for one united task. Dear Professor Anton Pieratne, Dean, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, my sincere invitation is for you to have your remarks.
Good morning to you all. Professor PMC Tilakaratne, the Vice Chancellor of the Open University Sri Lanka, the Chief Guest of the event, Deans of all the faculties, Health Sciences, Management, Natural Sciences, Engineering, and also Faculty of Graduate Studies, and also Faculty of the Education. Professor Sanat Vijayasinghe, Head of the Legal Studies Department, Professor Laila Chokron, Professor of International Economic Law and Director of the Global Justice and Rights Center of Excellence, University of Portsmouth. She is also the co-chair of this conference. Professor Marcus Wagner, Professor of Law, School of Law, Faculty of Business and Law, University of Wollongong. Professor Gregory Schaffer, Scott K. Ginsberg, Professor of International Law, Georgetown University Law Center. Dr. W. A. Vijayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, who delivers guest of honor speech today. Then Dr. Prashant Lal D. Alvis, Principals of Law College in Sri Lanka, and the Registrar, the Bursar, the Librarian, Assistant Registrar of the HSS Faculty and other Assistant Registrars, the Directors of the Open University of Sri Lanka, the Librarian, the Administrative Officers and the Directors, and all invited key scholars, researchers, paper presenters, and dear students. A warm welcome to you all and good morning to you all. I'm delighted to be here today to deliver a brief address at the launch of this important international research conference. The main theme of this conference is local approaches to international economic law. Provides us with a meaningful opportunity to reflect on how international standards can be adapted and utilized to create and improve local frameworks. In this sense, the conference will be particularly useful for understanding setting in Sri Lanka. This conference is very important for Sri Lanka due to 5 reasons as I understand. The first reason is it helps to address the desire of Sri Lankans of the government to follow international standards. The current situation in Sri Lanka can be understood as a turning point where people collectively sought to create a government committed to upholding international standards and benchmarks. People mandated, people wanted our government to follow international standards and benchmarks. This movement stemmed from frustration with a failing system and demanded reforms ranging from establishing better mechanism for delivering basic facilities to facilities ranging from to provide basic facilities to fundamental constitutional changes. So our people wanted the government to follow international standards to address basic needs to the change of constitution. Crucial areas such as local system reforms, addressing monopolies in international national trade, restructuring international debts, and resolving ongoing financial crisis with the support of the international bodies remain at the forefront. The second point, the importance of intellectual activities and research in higher education in Sri Lanka. It is very essential to organize more intellectual activities such as this conference to strengthen the higher education sector in Sri Lanka and foster a robust research culture. Sri Lankans have consistently argued that the government should allocate significant percentage of its GDP on education. However, the country has historically spent less than 2% of the GDP on education. The last year, they have allocated 1.8% of the GDP on education. The previous year, it was 1%, which is not enough. Additionally, both the central government and universities, like our university, allocate very limited funding for research activities. In such a context, conferences like this will give a lot of opportunities for engaging in research, scholarly work, and knowledge production remain restricted. Moreover, the increase in politicization and commercialization of education have failed in improving the higher education culture in Sri Lanka. So it is against this backdrop that the current conference is being held to emphasize the true value of academic and scholarly endeavors and highlight their critical role in upholding educational integrity and fostering knowledge-driven progress. The third point, why this conference is important for us. Sri Lankans are searching for the reasons for bankruptcy and mechanisms to deal with it. That is also very important. Then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe declared Sri Lanka as a bankrupt on 5th July 2022. The island nation has defaulted on 51 billion US dollars of foreign debts in May 2022. The forex reserves have been fluctuating around 2 billion US dollars since March 2020, which was sufficient only for buying essential stuff for 10 days. As a country declared bankrupt and currently undergoing debt restructuring by adhering to internationally accepted economic and legal frameworks, hosting conferences such as this is invaluable. This event comes at a critical time as our country works to overcome financial mismanagement and implement internationally accepted economic and legal principles. It offers policymakers, academics, and the public an opportunity to gain deeper understanding of the crisis and work collectively towards sustainable solutions. The fourth point, addressing the impact of financial crisis on Sri Lankans in a globalized world. The ongoing financial crisis has had a profound impact on Sri Lankans, compelling a significant number of young and old individuals to migrate to foreign countries in search of better opportunities. Many have lost hopes, struggles to envision a future in their homeland. The rate of migration has increased so rapidly that the government is struggling to meet the soaring demand for passport, leading to shortages. In this context, it is crucial to create a space to discuss the challenges faced by these migrants and their families to foreign countries, to give them the legal protection support available to them in their destination countries. This conference may serve as a platform to explore these issues and examine how various legal frameworks addresses the plight and upliftment of migrant communities from Sri Lanka. The final point, the impact of taxation in shaping human lives in Sri Lanka. Right now, 36% of our earnings are taxed. In general, the salary of our people are considered an income for family, community, and also extended family. The people like us, the academics and other government and private sector employees have to rapidly adjust to the new situation. The ordinary people pay a price for the unprofessional financial management by the political elites of this country. The fairness or unfairness of taxation also will be discussed within a legal framework in this conference. In that sense, to have an analytical discussion on the factors which shape my life, our own lives in Sri Lanka, this conference will be more useful. In this context, I extend my gratitude to the South Asia International Economic Law Network for organizing this conference in Sri Lanka. In the context, we need more and more this sort of discussions in our country. Finally, I thank all the organizers, participants, and distinguished guests for contributing to this significant initiative. I wish the conference great success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Piyaratne, for that warm and insightful welcome. This conference is a testament to the visionary leadership and dedication of our organizers. without whom this event would not have been possible. Your ongoing commitment to fostering academic excellence within the university continues to inspire all of us. My invitation here is to none other than the Vice Chancellor of the Open University of Sri Lanka, Senior Professor PMC Tilakaratne, the chief guest today. Dear sir, the floor is yours to address the gathering.
Very good morning to everyone. Dean Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Anton Pieratne, Professor Sanath Vijay Singh, of course, key figure in organizing this conference, the head of the Department of Legal Studies, Professor Laila Chukron, co-chair of this conference, Professor Marcus Wagner, Professor of Law, School of Law, Faculty of Business and Law, University of Wollongong, Professor Gregory Scheffer, Professor of International Law, Georgetown University Law Center, one of the keynote speakers of this conference, Dr. W. Vijayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, guest of honor to address this conference today, Deans of Faculties, Registrar, Bursa, Directors of the University, and Mr. Prasantalal De Alvis, Principal, Sri Lanka Law College, and all international participants, scholars, and my own academics of the university, administrative officers, ladies and gentlemen. It's with an immense pleasure to address you in this morning at this important occasion of the inauguration of this biennial conference. In the outset, I warmly welcome, as the Vice Chancellor of the Open University of Sri Lanka, all visitors to the Open University of Sri Lanka and to Sri Lanka. I extend my gratitude to the organizers for creating this platform to engage in a dialogue on the region's unique economic challenges and opportunities, as well as choosing the OSL as the host university. As the Vice Chancellor, I need to mention the Open University of Sri Lanka is home for today 42,000 students, and we have 6 faculties, 31 academic departments, and this university is not only located in Colombo, and this university is scattered all over Sri Lanka. So we have 9 regional centers and 19 study centers. So therefore, all that corners of this country, we have the Open University of Sri Lanka. And I'm very proud to address this international gathering. And also, I really once again appreciate your presence here to visit our country, to visit our university, to have this dialogue. As you all know, South Asia is a region defined by its diversity, resilience, and potential. Of course, my dean said that our country declared as bankrupt, one of our, not one of our previous president, but we are not bankrupt. We are not bankrupt. Economically we are bankrupt, but that's the word, the resilience we have now, and also we are, always rich in our minds and hearts and attitudes. So therefore, the resilience, the word, the meaning, of course, is there always. Again, this South Asia, home to nearly 1/4 of the world population. It's today 2.4 billion. Its economic vibrancy and cultural richness have positioned it as a key player in global affairs. However, to unlock its full potential, we must address the legal frameworks that shape economic activity within and beyond the region. Ladies and gentlemen, economic law is the backbone of our markets, trade relations, and financial systems. It governs the intricate web of agreements, treaties, and regulations that underpin economic transactions. In South Asia, this body of law must navigate an intricate interplay of the following, that is, diverse legal systems rooted in colonial legacies and local traditions, varied levels of economic development, from rapidly growing economies to those still finding footing, geopolitical complexities, and regional disparities as well. But keeping in mind this all, we have that opportunities in regional cooperation. That's why this biennial conference is happening today here in Sri Lanka. Despite these challenges, South Asia possesses tremendous opportunities to foster economic integration in terms of what? First thing, trade and investment. South Asia is underutilizing its potential for intra-regional trade, which accounts for only a fraction of its total trade volume. Improved legal frameworks for free trade agreements, cross-border investments, and dispute resolution mechanism can unlock significant economic benefits to this country. Second, digital economy and innovation. With the rapid rise of technology, South Asia stands at the cusp of a revolution. Economic laws must evolve to support e-commerce, financial technology known as fintech, and cross-border digital trade while ensuring data protection and cyber security. Third thing, sustainability and development. Climate change poses a pragmatic threat to Asia. Legal instruments must align with sustainability goals, promoting green investments and fostering regional cooperation to address shared environmental challenges. Then we have challenges of harmonization. Harmonizing economic law across South Asia is no small feat. Key obstacles include political sensitivities and historic tensions among nations. Then we have varied legal traditions, including common law, civil law, and customary practices. Institutional weaknesses in ensuring compliance with international norms and threats. These challenges, however, are not impossible. By fostering dialogue and learning from successful models of regional cooperation, South Asia can pave a way forward. South Asia's role in the global economy cannot be overstated. As a region, it must navigate a shifting global landscape defined by trade wars, protectionism, and rapid technological advancements. The rise of global value chains, changing investment patterns, and evolving trade norms necessitate proactive legal frameworks that reflect both regional priorities and global commitments. Therefore, that we need to call for action. That's why this conference are hosting here in Sri Lanka. Therefore, it is important, ladies and gentlemen, to explore academic and policy collaborations. Hence, this conference is a testament to the power of collaboration. Let us continue fostering partnerships between scholars, policymakers, and practitioners to develop forward-looking economic laws. South Asia needs robust institutions to mediate economic disputes, standardize trade practices, and advocate for the region's interests globally. What we need inclusive growth, therefore. Economic laws must prioritize equity and inclusion, ensuring that benefits of growth reach all segments of society, particularly women, youth, and marginalized communities. In conclusion, South Asia stands at a pivotal moment in economic journey. By addressing the region's legal complexities with determination and innovation, we can create a cohesive economic future that empowers our nations and strengthens our position on the global stage. I invite all of you to contribute your insights, expertise, and vision to this dialogue during these 3 days, today, tomorrow, and day after tomorrow. Together, let us build a framework of economic law that reflects the aspirations of South Asia and serves as a model for other regions. I request international scholars to take back everlasting memories from Sri Lanka's cultural diversity, hospitality, and beauty of our country as well. I wish this conference immense success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Vice Chancellor, sir, for your impactful address. Your support and strength towards SAIELN are beyond words as usual. In awarding the token of appreciations to our chief guest and to the Dean of the Faculty, I now invite Professor Sanath Vijayasinghe on stage. Thank you, sir, for your significant presence. You have been playing a significant role from the very beginning to date of SAIELN 2024. With your unwavering guidance and expertise in the field, it made all of us witness where are we today. It is truly a wonderful sight to see you today on OUSL stage. Professor Laila Shakroon, Professor of International Economic Law, Director of the Global Justice and Rights Centre of Excellence, University of Portsmouth, UK, and SAIELN co-chair. Dear Professor, we are waiting to have your remarks on this momentous occasion. The floor is yours.
Vice Chancellor Senior Professor PMC Tilakarante, Register of the US Open University Mrs. Vendeya Jaisen, Dean Humanities and Social Sciences Professor Anton Pirayante, and of course the Head of the Department of Legal Studies Professor Sanath Vijayasinghe. Thank you so much. Ayubowan, you see our wonderful logo, which has been designed by one of our colleagues from the Open University, and you'll know more about that in a few days. You see the great symbolism of the logo with the typical fisherman that you may have seen in Sri Lanka, coconut, tea, the ocean, the sun, the moon. It was a conscious decision for us to organize a conference in Sri Lanka. We really wanted to support the country in a phase of transition, in a phase of growth and hope for its economy and obviously its wonderful scholarship. So I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the South Asia International Economic Network. I'm co-chairing with Professor James Nedupara, my dear colleague and friend, who apologizes he can't make it right now because he's busy in Delhi, but you'll see him tonight. James and I have created this network in 2016-17 in Delhi, and as you will see in a second, we organized a number of events and indeed supported a number of projects. But I'd like to start with a story. The story that some of you might know, the story of a Greek traveler, a Greek monk and merchant, Cosmas Indukopletis, who, as you might understand, stands for Cosmas, there's a play on word with cosmos, and Indukopletis, the one who has traveled to India. Cosmas indeed sailed to, India in the 6th century, and he traveled probably from Alexandria in Egypt. He was very famous at that time for his work on what we called Christian topography. He actually drew a few maps of the earth, which he thought was flat, so he was a bit mistaken on this one, but he was very right about Sri Lanka, SAIELN. He described SAIELN in his voyage, in his notes, and we have some beautiful texts from this person, 6th century again, describing Sri Lanka as a wonderful place and a place of trade, a place of growth, a place which was strategically located in the Indian Ocean between, Europe and Asia, the East and the West, trading at that time already with China, India, obviously, but also Ethiopia, Europe, trading all sorts of very important goods from spices to other products. So I think you understand where I'm going. Despite an immense historical and also contemporary importance in trade, countries of South Asia, indeed, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, have little say, if any say, in trade policy. This is based on this very simple paradox of trade that James and I have decided to create the South Asia International Economic Network, which is an international, non-partisan, non-profit organization having the following objectives: to promote research and practice of international economic law and international relations by engaging with different South Asian academic and stakeholders or participants from civil society to practitioners, law firms, and businesses. We want to foster and engage research, academic understanding of international economic law in South Asia. And we have indeed organized plenty of events. Some of you nicely came to these events in India and across South Asia. Our approach, and that's something I'm going to refer to in a number of panels during this 3-day conference, our approach is critical, decolonial, interdisciplinary, collaborative, I dare say democratic, fostering ideas of equality, equity, and justice across South Asia and globally. So the theme of this year's conference is indeed local approaches to international economic law. What does it mean? Well, I think you will tell me in 3 days, but maybe some ideas. Those of us also working on Latin America are relatively familiar, I think, with this type of approach because we have worked on what we call now local communities. I'm just going to name a few cases of investment law which are quite familiar, I suppose. Well, Lupaca Gold against Peru, Bear Creek, Eco Oro, or not Latin America, but against Zimbabwe, Bernard von Petzold. These cases have implied, were concerned with somehow local communities, sometimes defined as indigenous people. We've had a number of interesting decisions, a number of dissenting opinions, trying to understand what we meant. In international investment law particularly, we noticed a growing interest in the notion of local communities. This notion is found in some international legal instruments as well. As you all know, the Rio Declaration and the Convention on Biological Diversity, and in national legislation in several countries. But these communities are extremely diverse. It's also a fashionable term, a term which is poorly defined. These communities come from very different socio-economic backgrounds, and their members are, as I said, very diverse. They are porous, they are overlapping and changing identities of both individuals. Let's think about farmers, small landholders, workers, activists, and organizations. Meanwhile, the notion of indigenous people is recognized in international law and associated with specific legal rights and safeguards, such as the free, prior, and informed consent that you all know about, that are enshrined in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but as well in the International Labour Organization Convention on the Rights of Indigenous and Tribal People in independent countries. Well, this being said, local approaches are slightly different from purely local communities. It's opposed to probably global or national, if not opposed, probably complementary as well. We can talk about bottom-up, we can talk about micro approaches. I'm looking at Professor Kuhlmann here. And we can talk about some fashionable terms that you may have seen in some recent policy reports, like granular. That's a term we see a lot at the moment. So indeed, this is important in policy production and something which has been discussed quite a lot around the ideas of the SDGs and sustainable development. Local also means to localize, to humanize, maybe, but also local might mean to restrict, to adapt, to distort, to confront, to reject. So let's see what you think about that. I'm sure we are going to be enlightened in these next 3 days. Without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to you, but before that, if you allow me a few more minutes, I would really like to thank a number of people without who the work would have been possible. We have been working hard for the past 6 to 8 months, and it is something to organize a conference in Washington, in Paris, in Geneva. It is something slightly different to organize a conference in Sri Lanka. We've had amazing support from the Vice Chancellor of the University, from the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, from the head of the law school, but also from numerous people from this university and the law school in particular. I will name a few, and you will hear me name them again and again throughout the conference. You will have to excuse my relatively basic pronunciation of Sri Lankan names. My crash course in Sri Lankan is quite recent. So first and foremost, Senior Lecturer Ms. Nilaka, Senior Lecturer Ms. Vasana, Senior Lecturer Mr. Danujka, Senior Lecturer Mrs. Niroshika, Senior Lecturer Mr. Raminda, and I'm not saying their family name, Senior Lecturer Mrs. Gillingteed, Senior Lecturer Mrs. Yadoda, Lecturer Mrs. Dimiti, Director Regional Education Services Mr. Anushka, Assistant Director Colombo Regional Center Ms. Vidyaya Bursa, of the university, Dr. Anura, she's in charge of finances, so I really had to say that. Of course, all our staff, all the students, volunteers, and I'd like to thank particularly as well our SAIEL team working with James in Delhi and myself, Pushkar, Ashutosh, Jamsid, and Say Sumana. Thank you very much, everyone, and you have a lovely conference.
Thank you, Professor Chokron, for your thought-provoking address and for setting the stage for today's discussion. Dear Professor Chokron, please wait on the stage for the token of appreciations. It is with great pleasure that I now invite to our esteemed Vice-Chancellor, Senior Professor PMC Tilakaratne, to the stage to give this token of appreciation to the Professor Chokron. Thank you, dear sir and Professor Chokron. Continuing with our conference segment, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Marcus Wagner, a distinguished law professor from the School of Law at the University of Wollongong. We are eager to hear your thoughts, Professor Wagner. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I will take a slightly different tack and will forego a very long list of thank yous and just instead want to thank the Vice-Chancellor, I will butcher that name, I knew that, Tilakaratne, the Professor and Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Piyaratne, and my colleague and head of the Department of Legal Studies, Professor Vijay Singh. I also want to thank Leila and as well as James, and all the people she thanked, I also thank, because I don't think I want to keep that much longer. So I've been asked to say a few words on behalf of the Society of International Economic Law, and I'm very happy to do so. I've been introduced as the Executive Vice President. I must disappoint you. I'm no longer the Executive Vice President. 10 days ago we had, or 11 days ago I think, something around there, we've had our annual general meeting, and I'm very happy to say, in some sense, that my time has come to an end because I'm term limited and it's always time for renewal, and that renewal has started. But of course, we have always, as SAIEL, supported the regional networks, and the South Asian International Economic Network is no different. And in that sense, we were very happy to sponsor 2 early career researchers who've been able to participate in this conference on that basis. So when I was asked to say a few words, I was thinking, what would I do and how would I frame this? And the way that I want to do this is to just think back about the time during which I was Executive Vice President of SAIEL, which was from 2018 to 2024, and how international economic law has changed during that time period, because it's changed profoundly. And that might help set the scene for the next 3 days. And the background to that scene, I think this was amply put beforehand, is very much in the Indo-Pacific region, and Sri Lanka is one of the crossroads of that region. So if I think back, the world since 2018 has undergone dramatic transformation. A resurgence of geopolitical confrontation, the rise of geoeconomic fragmentation, a general deterioration of international relations, escalating trade wars, and what I think is a very concerning trend of the weaponization of international economic relations and international trade relations in particular. And these shifts in turn then have profound implications for international economic law as we know it, demanding a reassessment of existing legal frameworks and the development of new approaches to navigate this increasingly complex and fragmented legal economy that we're facing. So if you think about some of the major milestones of the last few years, then I would mention as one of the more profound ones We see what's been called a trade war between China and the US. I wouldn't say it's the only trade war we see. We see many of those types of disputes. And who started is not really the point here, but we see this imposition of tariffs on Chinese goods initially, and then escalating tit-for-tat tariff rounds, retaliatory measures, and then a cycle of escalating trade restrictions. This then in turn disrupts not only these bilateral relations, but also relations around the world. And we're seeing this with the realignment of imports, the friendshoring, the reshoring, the nearshoring, whatever you want to call it. And that then has particular implications for supply chains around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, triggers an economic crisis, and I think with profound implications for countries like Sri Lanka. Everyone I've spoken to in the last 5 days that I've spent here in Sri Lanka has told me about COVID-19 and its impact on their daily livelihoods and their economic outlook. But it also highlights this interconnectedness that we've created over the last centuries, but much more accelerating over the last 20 to 30 years. But also the fragility of what we have built over the last years. So clearly the pandemic strained international relations even more, and accelerated the trend towards protectionism and economic nationalism. We then see the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and I'd say the renewed invasion of Ukraine, because at least in my world, it starts in 2014, and clearly has had a devastating impact on the global economy and specifically food supply chains, increasing prices for basic food supplies, energy market, and therefore increasing insecurity with respect to both of these commodities. We then see a whole range of sanctions against Russia, fragmenting the global economy, intensifying geopolitical tensions. We then see the war in the wider Middle East, and I don't necessarily want to focus only on the war between Hamas and Israel, but the wider Middle East, as we now see, which adds to regional instability in a region that's already not particularly stable, and further impacts food and food security issues that I mentioned before. Then, of course, we have global inflation and monetary policy tightening. Many countries, central banks raised interest rates, slowing economic growth, increasing debt burdens on individuals. And while people in countries that I come from or where I live, Germany and Australia, might complain, I think this is hitting much harder in developing countries than developed countries. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, climate change, which I think overshadows everything. And if it doesn't overshadow everything at this point, it should overshadow everything, because some of the conversations that I have sometimes seem to sort of deny or neglect that particular issue for short-sighted rationales most of the time. But the increasing impact of climate change, extreme weather events, and resource scarcity are exacerbating these existing tensions. In isolation, I think the world could have dealt with these fairly well, but in combination, if you will, these interconnected milestones have contributed to a sense of uncertainty and volatility in the global economy, with significant implications for the legal side. Now, a defining feature of this time, as I said, is the resurgence of geopolitics and the rise of geoeconomics, and I'm not going to go into long-winded details here, but they've led to a shift away from the rules-based multilateral trading order that we've seen emerging after World War II. And Leila's already hinted at this slightly, I think potentially hinted at this, that order was not necessarily set in stone, but is undergoing significant change. States are again increasingly prioritizing, maybe for ostensibly good, oftentimes for ostensibly bad reasons, national security and strategic considerations over economic efficiency in international cooperation, and this trend is evident if you look at trade restrictions, formation of regional economic blocs, and the growing emphasis, like I said, on friendshoring with politically aligned countries. And this rise of geoeconomic then presents a fundamental challenge to traditional principles of international economic law. non-discrimination, most favored nation treatment, national treatment, enshrined in the WTO agreement and sort of seen as the cornerstones are becoming weakened over and over again as we go along. And this then in turn raises questions about the future of the multilateral trading system and the future of law and international economic relations overall. Now, the most concerning trend to me, and you'll forgive me if I say this because I lead a project on called Weaponized Trade, is the increasing weaponization of trade relations. And I, for one, see countries like Sri Lanka as collateral damage, but the damage is increasingly high for those particular countries. We're seeing increasingly the usage of tools, sanctions, export controls, investment restrictions to coerce other countries to achieve these geopolitical objectives by way of economic means. You can look at sanctions all around the world. You can look at export controls imposed by a raft of different countries. Investment restrictions. As someone who lives in Australia, I always say this is like a plate, right? Because Chinese sanctions or weaponized trade measures against Australia were basically a full plate of food, next with some wine and the coal to heat up some of this food, right? These are just a few examples. We've mapped roughly 100 instances of weaponized trade measures. I'm happy to talk about that at some other point later during the conference. But this raises serious concerns about the stability of the global economy and the architecture of law that we have seen over the last few decades. That then in turn has implications for us as lawyers, right? And the discipline that we have, we talk about institution, we talk about rules, we talk about procedures. I just think about a subject that I need to teach in another 2 weeks, and I basically have to completely rewrite it because the world that I taught in 2018 no longer looks like the world I'm teaching into in 2025. So if we then look ahead, the future of international economic relations, I think, will be shaped by this evolving relationship between the United States and China on the one hand, between blocs these countries, at least in the past, have led. But I think we see an increasing fragmentation there as well, and the new Trump administration will make for an interesting period in that sense. We see the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, we see climate change, the rapid advancement of technologies, and these factors all then continue and or contribute to challenge the existing frameworks that I've just laid out. International economic law must adapt. Economic law must adapt to these changes. Whether this is strengthening the WTO, I'm very skeptical that will happen. Strengthening maybe other arrangements and agreements, fostering regional cooperation to mitigate these risks, we shall see where that goes. One way to do this is through local approaches to international economic law, as the conference theme says. Another, as the Vice Chancellor has pointed out, is through increasing resilience. Right? And resilience at different level and with different players interacting with one another. I, for one, look forward to learning over the next 3 days, to contributing also in small parts to the next 3 days, and wish us all a wonderful conference. Thank you very much.
I'm deeply grateful to you, sir, for your impressive address. I humbly request your presence on stage for a few minutes to award the token of tribute, and for that I invite Professor Anton Pieratne, Dean of the Faculty, on stage. Thank you once again, Professor Wagner and Professor Anton Pieratne. SAIELN 2024 is an outcome of a lot of hard work, many tireless efforts, and often sleepless nights. The success of today cannot be achieved without your generous contributions. Let me take a moment to express the sincere gratitude to our sponsors who paved our way towards SAIELN 2024. Center for Trade and Investment Law, Center for WTO Studies, National Institution for Transforming India, Reliance Industries Limited, Economic Laws Practice, Advocates and Solicitors, Sudat Pereira Associates, WTO Chairs Program, University of Portsmouth, Society of International Economic Law. Once again, hats off to your generosity. Thank you. The next move of today's ceremony is the keynote address. Let me invite Ms. Geethani Jeevanti, Senior Lecturer, Department of Legal Studies, to introduce the keynote speaker of SAIELN 2024.
Professor Gregory Schaefer is the Scott K. Ginsberg Professor of International Law and served as President of the American Society of International Law from 2022 to 2024. An internationally renowned expert in law and globalization, Professor Schaefer specialized in international trade law and international economic law. He has authored 11 books and over 100 articles and chapters, addressing topics such as transnational legal ordering, comparative institutional analysis, and the global impact of emerging economics. His book, Emerging Powers and the World Trading System, which was published in 2021, won the 2022 Chadwick F. Elger Prize. Professor Schaefer's career is marked by prestigious roles, including Shim Shu Visiting Professor at the London School of Economics, Fernand Braudel Fellow at the European University Institute, and Fulbright Senior Research Scholar in Rome. He has received multiple U.S. National Science Foundation awards and delivered lectures in over 25 countries. He serves on editorial boards of leading journals, including the American Journal of International Law and Journal of International Economic Law. A graduate of Dartmouth College and Stanford Law School, he practiced law in Paris for 7 years. Beyond academia, he has published poetry and was a scholar at the Brett Law Writers Conference.
For the wonderful introduction. Dear Professor Schaefer, we are eager to hear your address. The stage is yours, sir.
Great. Thank you for welcoming me here. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chancellor. Thank you, Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, the head of the Law Department. Thank you, Professor Shakroon and Professor Ndumpra. It's really just a great, great pleasure to be here. Maybe I'll just start by saying, part of this is we're here to learn from each other. And as the immediate past president of the American Society of International Law, I've already learned how to start a conference with dance, with music, with light, right? And so I just wanted to note our mission and what I think how it informs our topics for today. So the mission of the American Society of International Law is one, it's to foster the study and understanding of international law, because without that, one can't participate in engaging with it and shaping it what it is to be and its impact. The second part of that mission is to promote the establishment and the maintenance of international relations on the basis of law and justice. Think of what the contrast of that is, international relations based on power and injustice. Right? So what we're here today is to explore how to make international law the best that it can be. Now, the theme for today, this important theme of the conference, local approaches to international economic law, when I consider it, two thoughts immediately come to mind. The first is, ultimately, the stakes of international economic law are local. They affect communities, it affects individual lives. But second, one cannot think of the local without considering the global and the transnational. Right? One cannot think about it without thinking about structures and processes that impact the local. To start about it, one cannot think of the local without considering the structural and unsustainable debts plaguing the developing world, which worsened following the COVID-19 pandemic, leading, for example, to Sri Lanka's default, sovereign default on its debt, and financial, social, and political crises. One cannot think of it with respect to the impact on budgets, affecting infrastructure, affecting electricity, affecting the ability to communicate with each other. One cannot think about it without thinking the impact on poverty levels. My understanding is that poverty in Sri Lanka has reached about a quarter of the population. Okay? The stakes, the local stakes, in other words, are high. Among the questions for us here today is to think about how the local can harness international economic law for social and economic development, on the one hand, and secondly, how the local can inform international economic law and potentially change international law and also support the need for international relations based on the role of law and the pursuit of justice and not on power and injustice. So what I thought I would do with this keynote is to tap into my own work and to really raise three primary themes from my work. The first is a framework I use in a series of books and articles called transnational legal ordering, as opposed to international law. And that is, in transnational legal ordering, it's not everything doesn't take place purely at the international level, the local matters. The local is about the adaptation to international processes. It's about the resistance to international processes. And it's also about informing and innovating based on local experiences. The second theme of my work is legal pragmatism as part of a new legal realism in the importance of empirically studying the local. Because only by empirically studying the local can the local inform the international. And the third is strategies for building what I call legal capacity. It's legal capacity for countries like Sri Lanka, India, other countries in the developing world to be able to engage and to shape transnational lawmaking and national and local responses to international lawmaking. Each of these themes are central to the work I have done with James Nadumpara. We did a series of articles and book chapters on India and its place in transnational legal ordering processes, empirically studying how India has attempted to build legal capacity, both to engage at the international level and to adapt its local policies to harness the international as best it could. They are animating features of that work, and I think it's central to this conference in terms of highlighting South Asian experiences of international law, economic law, to learn from them, and to provide voice to these perspectives at the international level, as well as in academic and in policy discussions. And my My colleague at Georgetown Law, Katrin Kuhlman, who will be giving a concluding keynote for this conference, right? Her concept of micro-international law, building from local experience, is so central. Okay. So I'll say a few words about these three themes. Okay, first of all, the concept of transnational legal orderings differs from international law and from most conceptualizations of international economic law, and that international economic law typically only looks at what takes place in Geneva, right? What takes place at the international level so far away. When I went to the Sri Lankan mission in Geneva and met the ambassador there, you see there's such a small mission, say, compared to the mission of the European Union or the United States, right? In India, when I went to the mission, the person responsible for WTO dispute settlement had no air conditioning, was in the bottom floor with a fan, with piles of paper surrounding them, right? So that reality, right, of how then to engage in this system. Okay. From the perspective of transnational legal ordering, in contrast to most approaches, the local, we look at the international in engaging both states and other actors. But through transnational processes, international economic law shapes law and practice and economic and social opportunities domestically around the world, thus including the local. Such ordering involves the transnational interaction of lawmaking and practice across different levels of social organization, from the local to the international and the global. And so the processes from the perspective of transnational legal ordering are not just top-down. They're not just everything flows from the international to the local, but they're multi-directional. We know that companies in the United States inform what international economic law becomes the text of international law agreements, and what informs practices and training and so forth. And so what is interesting from a transnational legal ordering perspective is the interaction of the local and the global. It's about how these processes, how norms, legal norms, economic law norms are constructed, how they flow, how they settle, how they unsettle in terms of actual practice. So the term transnational has three core aspects, which I think are important for this conference. The first is that the state and state officials are just one of many actors in transnational processes engaged in transnational legal ordering of the global economy. The second, it points to the ways that transnational legal ordering transcends and potentially transforms states. So it's not just taking place at the international level. The stakes are high because it has impacts at the local level. And the third is it underscores that one needs to assess the interaction of state and non-state actors at different levels of social organization, including international organizations, transnational networks, national institutions, local practices, to understand transnational legal ordering. The local, in sum, is a key part of reframing the study of international economic law from that of international law at the top to transnational legal ordering that is both top-down and bottom-up and ultimately affects domestic and local practices and prospects. Key to understanding transnational legal ordering processes is the definition of problems. What are the problems that law is to address? Policymaking, legal texts, and practices follow from the framing of problems. Thus, it is critical for discussions over the next days to understand how international economic law problems and goals have been framed and how they could be adjusted from South Asian perspectives, grounded in lived experiences. Second, one must address the issues pragmatically in terms of goals and practices. Goals follow from the construction of what the problem is. Legal pragmatism is a core component of legal realism, which involves empirical study. It involves the assessment of how the law operates in practice and action. It involves the law's subjects, on the ground, including the potential contributions to the understanding of how we should conceive of problems and goals. The goals of international economic law, broadly speaking, ultimately should be to benefit local communities and individuals, local constituencies. Ultimately, though, it's not goal, it's the practices that matter, and the practices should inform our evaluation of how we are meeting the goals. And that involves, since no one knows what practices are going to be successful in advance, it involves trial and error. It involves experimentation. And here contexts matter. Sri Lanka, Nepal are very different contexts than India and Indonesia even. And of course, India and Indonesia are very different contexts than the United States and Europe. But those contexts, they should inform what the goal should be. Third, as in all areas of international economic law, capacity building, legal capacity building, and thus this conference will be central to articulate policies in light of experiences. For developing countries and their stakeholders to engage effectively, they will need to develop legal and policy capacity to exercise voice, resistance, and transnational and domestic adaptation, hybridization, and creative problem solving. So there are many different ways of thinking about how legal capacity matters, but here are 5 strategies that build from my earlier work, including with James, on developing legal capacity in the international economic law context. First, developing countries and emerging economies need to enhance mechanisms of consultation with domestic stakeholders to understand the challenges they face. They cannot be simply back in the capital and not listening to the lived experiences of those constituencies on the ground. That's the way that they were able to develop policy proposals, proactively develop policy proposals instead of simply being reactive to the policy proposals coming forth from the great powers. Second, is to pool government resources through national, regional, and international centers and networks. Networks specializing in particular issues, which bring together government officials, academics, the private sector, lawyers, and other stakeholders. And so SAIELN, it illustrates and it builds. I'm so happy to see what you've constructed here now with this 4th biennial. It builds from sort of this basic concept. Sri Lanka by itself, what can it do in the international stage? But by forming networks of South Asian, so we just noted over 2 billion people in South Asia, there you can exercise more voice. This is central to the way the European community operates. Think Portugal has no power on the international stage, but by pooling resources together, developing networks, they can exercise more voice. Third, very important, developing countries can work with allies in the global north. Once we start thinking about that international economic law is not just about states, but it's about other stakeholders, right? In the world of asymmetric power, which is the reality, right? Unless one builds networks with allies in the global north, one will not be able to undercut the positions of the powerful in those states. So just to give one example, during the AIDS crisis affecting South Africa, it was working through different non-governmental organizations in the United States, like ACT UP, right? Like Oxfam, or Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, that you undercut, raising moral issues, raising principled issues, shaming U.S. officials for their positions. It was with working with them that they were enhancing their prospects of success. Okay. If you think about the Biden administration recently backed off of its position on data, and it was very much upset, right? Many major corporations in Silicon Valley. But it backed up, why? Not because of pressure from Sri Lanka or India, but from pressure from local constituencies in the United States. Fourth, just as we're in a new era now, we're no longer the United States being the hyperpower, right? We're now back in a new form of a Cold War, but this also offers opportunities, right, for developing countries to play off the powers with each other in order to have more financing for infrastructure and so forth, right? And so that'll be an interesting sort of new prospect of how one takes advantage of this. The United States is concerned, and China is concerned, right, about how they're perceived, right, around the world. And fifth, one needs to support scholarship that is contextualized and informed by South Asian perspectives and experiences and practices to counter the scholarship that comes predominantly from the global north that is published in the major journals, right? And so this network is so central to that. And we see major changes taking place in sort of informing not just what's happening within concerns the definition of problems from the United States perspective, but from those from other peoples around the world. The world is changing in that respect. So I'm going to turn a little bit to the purported goals of international economic law. How should we conceive of them? And here I just take from a chapter of a forthcoming book that I'm finishing here in Sri Lanka. It's a simple book, it's very thin, called Advanced Introduction to International Economic Law. It'll be a nice counterpart to the book by James Adupar and Leila Shakroon on international economic law, because it's thin as opposed to a thick textbook, right? So they are nice complements. But so what are the goals of this? And the chapter is entitled The Contested Goals and Functions of International Economic Law. What are they? And we see they shift over time, they've shifted over history, right? And they're in the process of shifting now. So how should we conceive of them? And how should we conceive of them from the basis of the experience of the local here? So there are many ways to frame goals and functions of any field and subfield of international economic law as actors who construct what the goals are, right? And those are often contested in terms of what the goal should be, right? And the conceptualization of these goals have changed over time. Think about after Bretton Woods is really framed by the United States, the UK, and so forth. But it was a very different system. It really was balanced of trying to create some basic structures for international law, liberalizing trade, but at the same time protecting national autonomy, particularly the social welfare state in the United States and Europe. And that changed, of course, in the 1990s and 2000 with rapid liberalization, which has major pushbacks now in the United States and Europe, giving rise to populist leaders such as our new president-elect, Donald Trump, once again, which will reframe how to perceive of the system whatsoever, right? Which will be based on power, right? But the Biden administration, if you think about it, it's sort of how it's shifted radically, right? In terms of focused on resilience, focused on climate change, sustainability, focused on social inclusion and concerns which gave rise to the rise of populism in the United States, and you see this in Europe. And so how does one think about it? Well, I put forth, and it's complicated in the international economic law field because you have trade, you have investment, you have finance, you have tax. I think that traditionally across these areas, one could think about macro public goals and then sort of more micro type private goals. And the emphasis on them has shifted over time. And so the sort of a central goal, I think, came out of Bretton Woods, especially after the Great Depression and the chaos and the rise of Nazism, was just to create some basic financial stability. And the belief was, is this having some basic sense of an international organization or an international treaties would provide from some basic forms of cooperation to try to solve problems, have financial stability, and this would enhance the prospects for peace. Very macro level goal. A second macro goal was just to manage interdependence, economic interdependence. One state's actions always has potential negative impacts on another. And so how do you manage that? How do you take into account, how do you try to force states reciprocally to take into account the impact of their actions on others? How do you create treaties based on that sense of reciprocity? And reciprocity is a central human sort of norm to foster cooperation, to foster relationships based on cooperation as opposed to domination. A third, and so how do you manage interdependence? A third was, and this is what we often hear, is to enhance prosperity, right? That somehow we create rules that would enhance prosperity. And ultimately, this, I think, for this conference is how can international economic law support economic and social development? Again, notice those are all macro goals. Now I'm going to shift, I think, but these are goals, and you see them in the preambles of treaties, you see them in the jurisprudence that interprets the meaning of treaties. So they're very important, the goals, right? Because they create sort of the normative constructions of how to interpret the rules, how to apply them. So I think one needs to start with understanding what are our goals, what are our core principles, because those inform everything else. So a fourth, I think, traditionally has been basically to create stability for economic operators. Okay? That's important for planning. How can you plan unless you have a basic framework of rules? Otherwise, things can change overnight, leading to trade wars. And the fifth, and this has been sort of the most sort of focused on individuals and businesses, is the protection of private parties from arbitrary and unfair action. This is subject to interpretation. Unfair to who, right? Because there's not only public power, there's also private power. So how do we think about fairness? But that is central, right, to how we both construct what the goal is and then what are the practices, how do they play out in action? Okay. The chapter then addresses alternative critical framings of how to think about international economic law, such as power and distribution. Is international economic law in practice? Is it ultimately about domination? Right? Is it about trying to use law to legitimize the exercise of power? How do we think about it? And you see this in Twale approaches, you see this in neo-Marxist approaches. You also see it, though, in sort of my approaches, sort of socio-legal approaches, is really investigating empirically, how does this operate on the ground in practice? Okay, just to give an example, but we'll hear, international investment treaties are based, in a sense, they're symmetric formally, right? Formally, they're symmetric. It's a treaty between two countries to protect capital, but they're asymmetric in two ways. One, they create rights for investors, but no duties or obligations on investors. And second, as we know, most of that capital comes from a few countries. And so it protects their capital, but not local capital. Right? And if anything, it creates potential asymmetry because foreign capital gets privileges that local capital does not receive. Okay. So, but notice also what goals do not appear, right, in this list, which I mentioned. So they do not, there's nothing about equality in any of these goals, right? And there's good reason. Not good reason in the sense of a normative reason, but positively explaining because the powerful don't want equality, right, to be expressed as a goal. Certainly distribution is not a goal, right, in any of these, the way this has been constructed. So I mention all this is because we're at a time of change. And so what are we going to make of that change, right? How are we going to define goals? Marcus mentioned climate change. How is climate change become a central goal? But if climate change becomes a central goal, who defines it? Because how you define it, how you operationalize it, is going to have asymmetric effects potentially, right? Is it trade from from developing countries suddenly going to affect high import taxes, right? Which is completely antithetical to the sense that there's common but differentiated responsibilities for climate change. How do we operationalize? How do we define that goal? Okay. So to conclude, it'll be critical to address in our discussions the key problems that international economic law should address in light of experiences in South Asia, and thus how to specify the goals in terms of economic development that benefits stakeholders broadly. In this light, one can assess different policy options that should be developed and evaluated in light of such experiences, including in an experimentalist vein. And some goals should be developed in light of the framing of problems and actual experiences. Experiences and practices can be shared and assessed transnationally in light of the opportunities and the constraints that we face. In the process, we can shape these opportunities and constraints through our engaged action. I greatly look forward to our discussions, our conversation. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you.
Thank you, Professor Schaffer, for your enlightening speech filled with knowledge and wisdom deeply resonated with our audience. Leaving few minutes for any questions from the audience. Professor, I hereby request your presence on stage again. To extend our gratitude to Professor Gregory Schaffer by awarding a token of tribute, I am pleased to invite Professor Leila Shokron on stage. Thank you, Professor Schaffer and Professor Leila.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time to hear from one of our esteemed speakers, Dr. W.A. Wijewardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, who will deliver the Guest of Honours address. Before we invite Dr. Wijewardena to the podium, I would like to call upon Ms. Diniti Ranasinghe, Lecturer, Department of Legal Studies, to kindly introduce him to the audience.
Dr. W.A. Wijewardena is a distinguished economic and former Deputy Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, where he served for impressive 35 years, including 9 years in senior leadership role as a Deputy Governor, the longest tenure in the bank's history. During his illustrious career, he played a pivotal role in shaping Sri Lanka's monetary and financing policies, leaving an indelible mark on nation's economic development. Dr. Wijewardena holds academic credentials from Sabaragama University of Sri Lanka and also the California Metropolitan University, equipping him robust foundation in economic and financial management. Beyond his contributions in the central bank, he was the founding general manager of CRIB, a long-serving chairman of the Institute of Bankers, and driving force behind the Business Management School, a successful collaboration with Northumbria University, offering international accreditation programs for Sri Lankan students. Renowned his technical expertise, integrity, and independence, Dr. Wijewardena is a respected media commentator and a columnist who simplified complex economic concepts for public. His tireless mentoring throughout the leadership continued to inspire generations of economics and policymakers, making him a beacon of knowledge and integrity in Sri Lanka's economic discourse.
Thank you, Diniti. Dear sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I am pleased to be here at the Open University of Sri Lanka, which is the largest university in Sri Lanka by student population, the most efficient university because it has the least cost per student, and also the most effective university because it has been able to make Sri Lanka's higher education and inclusive education. So Senior Professor Tilakaratna, Vice Chancellor, distinguished experts from all over the world on international economic laws, academia here in Sri Lanka, and ladies and gentlemen. Just before before I make my presentation, I'd like to make a little clarification here. It has been a political slogan used in Sri Lanka that Sri Lanka was a bankrupt nation. Sri Lanka was not bankrupt. As the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has very correctly pointed out in its 2023 annual economic review, Sri Lanka had undergone an unprecedented economic downturn. That's how it has been termed. Everybody knows a bankruptcy means that the country is unable to repay its entire debt. But the problem with Sri Lanka was we had a liquidity problem. We didn't have enough foreign exchange to repay some of our external creditors, and as a result Sri Lanka had gone for a debt suspension. It's not a debt default, it's a debt suspension. Now of course everything has come into place and we have been able to negotiate with the foreign creditors, the bilateral creditors, and also the ISBs, international sovereign bond holders, for a debt postponement so that Sri Lanka would again become a country which is able to honor its foreign debt obligations. Now when it comes to these local approaches to international economic laws, I find that the term itself has some problem because economics and law had been traditionally a single subject for more than 5,000 years. The best example is that the Indian economics guru Kautilya, who wrote the first economic treatise on economics called the Arthasastra, had codified law, economics, culture, diplomacy, government, and everything into a single text. But of course what happened was in the last 100 years or so, the two subjects were separated. In my view, the separation is artificial because both in economics and in law, what we are concerned is about the human beings, the human behavior. It is the same human behavior principles that we apply in law and also that we apply in economics. For example, even today, the best scholarly journal on the subject is the Journal of Law and Economics. That's the best economic journal. So therefore, when we talk about the local approaches to international economic laws, we are ignoring the fact that human beings are same everywhere, whether it is in the global south or the global north. They are driven by one particular drive. That drive is to benefit from cooperation with each other. It reminds me of the saying by the Oxford trained historian Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote the famous book on Sapiens. It was a bestseller in the market. He had said that the mankind has been able to develop civilizations unlike other species in the world because of his ability to cooperate in large numbers with each other. That is why when it comes to the global north and the global south, they are not two separate entities. The global north requires the global south requires the global north. By cooperating with each other and recognizing the role played by each other, human beings can have a win-win situation for them, and therefore when we talk about the local approaches to international economic laws, I find some difficulty in understanding it, because in my view it should be a global approach to global international economic laws and not the local approach to local international laws. But what we have to say is that the if you take a country like Sri Lanka in South Asia, Sri Lanka's prosperity will depend on our ability to integrate with the rest of the world seamlessly. For thousands of years, more than 5,000 years, Sri Lanka had been a trade-dependent nation. And one of the good examples is that the Sri Lanka cannot live alone because it's a very small country. We have a very small market. Our middle class is about 4 million people compared to the middle class of India, our neighbor to the north, 700 million. And therefore, unless we get ourselves integrated to the rest of the world, we cannot create prosperity. And that was how Sri Lanka did that for over 5,000 years in the past. So Sri Lanka will have to enter into bilateral trade agreements, multilateral trade agreements, and also to regional trade agreements to create prosperity for Sri Lankans. And this is the heritage that we have got over the historical period. If we take the prehistoric era, in the 6th century BCE, according to the great chronicle of Sri Lanka called Mahavansa, the Prince Vijaya, who had landed in one of the beaches of the northwestern region of the country called Tammenna, had been confronted by a local princess called Princess Queen. According to Mahavansa, Princess Queen had hosted Prince Vijaya and his retinue of about 600 people with a meal cooked out of the rice that had been salvaged from the ships that had been wrecked in the high seas. So what it means is, even in the 6th century BCE, there had been a vibrant trade in Sri Lanka, and the ships had been wrecked, and the goods that had been there in the ships had been actually appropriated by people who had salvaged the risk. But later, following this Kautilyan type of economic recommendation, the Sri Lankan kings had followed the rules for appropriating or apportioning the goods that had been salvaged from those ships. And therefore, historically, we have a reason to believe that it's the international law relating to the goods that have been traded that should apply to us. What happens today, I'm speaking from my experience in the central bank, because when it comes to entering international agreements, one problem we often encounter is the legal system in Sri Lanka. Even though we think that we have the best legal system in our country, in the world, the rest of the world doesn't believe it so. In every international agreement, if you can examine, there's a provision that the law related to the agreement should be either the British law or US law or Singaporean law, even the Hong Kong law. So most of the agreements that I have signed when I was in the central bank, the law applicable was the British law, because that is the law that is very close to Sri Lanka. Therefore, it is necessary for Sri Lanka to develop its capacity in handling international disputes to the satisfaction of all the people, all the parties that are involved. The foreign contractors still insist on having a clause in the legal documents that the law applicable should be one of the laws of some of these countries where we have the advanced legal structures. One problem I can encounter here is that relate here is that Sri Lanka had a oil hedging problem dating back to year 2009 when the global crude oil prices had skyrocketed. The Standard Chartered Bank came to the central bank and the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation. They advised Sri Lanka to go into a hedging agreement so that the prices can be stabilized. But what happened was there was a knowledge deficiency on the part of the Sri Lankan negotiators. They had agreed on a price of the hedging when the crude oil prices would go above $120, the Standard Chartered Bank will compensate Sri Lanka. But the lower part of the hedging agreement, the Sri Lankan people didn't know about it. And as a result, they had agreed if the prices fall below 105, Sri Lanka will have to compensate Standard Chartered Bank. Unfortunately for Sri Lanka, the oil prices plummeted in the global markets. It went below 105 and Sri Lanka was asked to compensate Standard Chartered Bank, and Sri Lanka refused. It refused on a legal principle, because for more than 10,000 years, the global commerce had been based on one single legal principle called caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. If something goes wrong, it is the buyer who will have to take responsibility. But in 1980s, after one of the counties in California called Orange County went bankrupt because it had acceded to the advice given by the JP Morgan company, and it had invested in the derivative products, the most complex products in there, because the people in the JP Morgan had gone to the treasurer of the Orange County and advised him that why don't you invest in derivative products and make super profits. Unfortunately, the derivative products went in the other way, like in Sri Lanka, and as a result, the Orange County became bankrupt. the people in the Orange County took J.P. Morgan to courts. A new legal principle was developed called the caveat venditor. Let the seller beware. And J.P. Morgan was found guilty for not advising properly the treasurer of the Orange County of the complexities involved in a derivative product. And therefore, J.P. Morgan had to compensate. In this famous hedging deal also, when the case was taken up by London Commercial Court, Sri Lanka took the position that Standard Chartered Bank had not properly advised Sri Lanka, because in other words, it was the caveat venditor. It was the fault of the Standard Chartered Bank for not advising Sri Lanka to do that. Unfortunately, what happened was the finance manager of the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation was a double qualified accountant. He was qualified in Chartered Institute of London and Wales as well as Chartered Institute of Sri Lanka. So therefore, the Commercial High Court took the position Standard Chartered Bank doesn't have a responsibility to advise Ceylon Petroleum Corporation of the complexities involved in the hedging agreement. So then we lost the case. And we had to pay a thumping compensation to Standard Chartered Bank. But this is a recurrent issue. More recently in Sri Lanka, there was a primary dealer called Entrust. And that primary dealer had conversed with some of the cooperative societies in Sri Lanka, which does not have any legal opinion. It has asked the cooperative societies to invest in government securities. In the process, the Entrust primary dealer had double sold. It was a multiple sale because whatever the securities purchased by the cooperative societies have been resold by Entrust to some other people. So the total loss was about 11 billion Sri Lanka rupees. Now it was a clear case of caveat venditor, because the cooperative societies, we cannot expect them to know the complexities of the investments in government securities. And we have to give them both the pluses and the minuses, and therefore the Entrust had to pay the cooperative society. Unfortunately, Entrust didn't have sufficient assets to do so. So the cooperative society had lost. Why I am telling all these things is that the knowledge on the part of the people who participate in international transactions is crucial for us to develop an approach for both parties, the people who participate on the other side as well as this side, to have a win-win situation in the international agreements, transactions. And therefore, what is necessary for Sri Lanka today is to build up confidence among the international participants about the legal structure in Sri Lanka, and the ability of Sri Lankan professionals to do the transactions, negotiations on an equal footing, develop the professionals to do so, and therefore it will be a situation where people of equal caliber would be negotiating with each other. We found it when it came to the CEPA. This is the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with India, which we negotiated in 2004. I was involved in that from the central bank. There was Indian delegation headed by the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. And the two teams, when we met, we found that to negotiate such a comprehensive trade agreement, a Sri Lankan delegation had to learn a lot. And fortunately, our delegation was led by Dr. Saman Kalegama, who was the at that time the executive director of the Center for Policy Studies, and therefore we were able to come up with an agreement which would benefit both Sri Lankans and Indians. So what I mean is that we have lost that caliber now. If Sri Lanka wants to engage itself more productively with the rest of the world, we have to have a continuous training program for Sri Lankan professionals to do negotiations on an equal footing. They should be trained in both soft skills and hard facts of economics. The ability to negotiate with other people, the soft skills, without offending them. The hard facts, how the global trade structure works, because we find the global geopolitical factors play an important role in trade negotiations. So how to handle them, how we would be able to convince the other parties without offending them that any trade agreement between two parties is a win-win situation for both, because there is no any case for any party to exploit the other. So we have to reform Sri Lanka's judicial system. We have to train judges, we have to train lawyers to handle these cases, because you will be noticing even in the recent past when one of the ships which had brought hazardous material to Sri Lanka, when it got sunk within Sri Lankan territorial waters, the case was to be taken up in Singapore, not the local courts. So we have to train our judges, we have to train our lawyers to handle these cases. But it's not a short-term goal, because you cannot do it overnight. It's a matter for a network like this to have a special program to train the Sri Lankan lawyers, Sri Lankan judges, and also Sri Lankan professionals as to how they should handle these international transactions. They are so complex. So when it comes to trade liberalization, we have to balance in free trade with protecting domestic industries. So it's a constant struggle even today, when most of the foreign investors come to Sri Lanka, the local manufacturers, local entrepreneurs, they protest it, thinking that the particular agreement is an opportunity for the foreigners to exploit Sri Lanka, which should not be the case, because as I have mentioned earlier, any trade agreement should be a win-win situation for both parties. Then we have the investment protection, attracting foreign investments, because presently we have the multilateral investment guarantee agency, MIGA, run by the World Bank. We are members of that. But of course, when it comes to local laws, we always find that the local legislators can overrule most of the international agreements. It had happened in the past, and therefore there must be a guarantee given to all these people under MIGA and under various trade agreements for the parties who had been involved in agreements with Sri Lanka, the protection from investment. Then, as was mentioned earlier also by the speakers, the intellectual property rights is a big problem, because it always pays us to rob from another party and gain temporary benefits. This is happening throughout the world today, and therefore intellectual property rights protection is a must. So if you take the 4 countries in South Asia, Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh and Pakistan, we have different problems. But all these countries can, through a network like this, join together and develop a system to negotiate on an equal footing with the rest of the world. So the trade agreements, we have the WTO trade agreements, we have regional trade agreements, and also we have bilateral trade agreements. And all these agreements are necessary in a world where there is no free trade. But if there is free trade, there is no necessity for us to go into these trade agreements, because the free trade will take care of the rights and the opportunities of the people involved. But in the absence of free trade, the trade is often governed by geopolitical considerations. So as a result, we have to enter into these trade agreements. And when we enter into these trade agreements, it's very important that a country like Sri Lanka will have to train our own professionals to do the job on an equal footing, so that we would be able to bring prosperity to Sri Lanka. So the balancing domestic policies with international economic laws is a very important thing. Our trade policy, our investment policy, intellectual property right policy and the domestic laws, those should be aligned together so that there will be a convergence of the requirements, the objectives and the philosophy, vision, mission and everything with Sri Lankan laws as well as the foreign laws. So what we need is the global cooperation, not just looking at local approaches to international economic laws. We will consider ourselves as a part of the global community and develop ourselves as a global cooperation. So thank you very much.
Dear sir, your presence on stage is highly appreciated for a few minutes. Thank you, sir. The insights you shared, backed by your rich experience and vast knowledge, made us delighted. Accept our profound thanks for the significant contribution you made towards making this event a success. Sir, please accept the token of tribute for your remarkable presence today, and in awarding the token, I invite Ms. Niluka Damayanti, Senior Lecturer, on stage. Thank you, Dr. Vishwavardhana and Ms. Niluka Damayanti.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we officially end the inauguration ceremony of the conference. On behalf of the organizing committee, I wish you a day filled with insightful discussion, productive networking and meaningful collaborations.
Live streaming session would come to an end from now onwards.
Refreshments are available just outside the auditorium, so please feel free to enjoy them and return here for the upcoming panel discussions. As per the agenda, all panel discussion will take place here in the auditorium. Technical sessions will be held in the Senate room, boardroom of the Faculty of Natural Sciences, and boardroom of the Faculty of Engineering, and boardroom of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Science. Our organizing team is available to assist and guide you to appropriate technical session venues. Should you have any questions or require directions, please don't hesitate to reach out to them. Thank you, and we look forward to the enriching dialogues and collaborations. Thank you.